3 months passed after the floating incident, and Alex thought he'd adjusted to having an alien roommate. Zara helped him ace his computer science courses while he taught her about human pop culture and social media trends. They had movie nights where she'd ask endless questions about why humans found certain things funny. Their friendship felt normal, even if the circumstances weren't. Then February arrived, and everything changed overnight. Alex woke up on a Tuesday morning and immediately knew something was different. The apartment felt warm, almost tropical, despite the heating being set to its usual temperature. He stumbled to the kitchen for coffee and found Zara pacing back and forth, her usual calm demeanor completely gone. "Morning," Alex said, but Zara didn't respond. She was muttering something in her native language while wringing her hands. Her skin had an odd shimmer to it, like she was running a fever. But when he asked if she was okay, she just shook her head. "I'm fine. Just tired," she said, but her voice was tight with stress. Over the next few days, Zara's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd start conversations and then trail off mid-sentence, staring into space like she was listening to something Alex couldn't hear. She stopped eating the meals she usually prepared, surviving instead on some kind of energy bars she kept in sealed containers in her room. The apartment got warmer each day. Alex had to crack windows even though it was still winter outside. When he asked Zara about it, she looked genuinely confused. "Is it warm?" "I hadn't noticed," she said, but sweat was beading on her forehead. By Friday, Alex was seriously worried. Zara hadn't slept in 3 days, as far as he could tell. She spent hours standing at their living room window, hands pressed against the glass, looking up at the sky like she was searching for something. When he tried to get her attention, it took several tries before she'd respond. "Zara, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She turned to him with wild eyes, and for a moment he thought she might cry. "I got the call," she whispered. "What call?" "Your phone hasn't rung." "Not that kind of call." She sat down heavily on their couch, looking more exhausted than he'd ever seen her. "It's biological. My people, we go through something every 7 of your years. It's like your body telling you it's time to find someone to bond with." Alex felt his stomach drop. "Bond with? Like, romantically?" "It's complicated. More than romance, deeper than that. It's a mental and physical connection that creates a partnership for life. During this time, our bodies change. Our minds become hyper-focused on finding the right match. It usually lasts about a month." The apartment seemed to grow even warmer as she spoke. Alex could see fine tremors running through her hands. "Okay. So you need to find someone of your species. Can't you contact the others you mentioned?" Zara's laugh was bitter. "That's the problem. I was supposed to return home for this. My people have traditional gathering places, ways to meet compatible partners. But I missed the window. I was so focused on my life here, on my work, on our friendship, that I didn't pay attention to the timing." Alex started to understand the magnitude of the situation. "So you're stuck here, going through this alone?" "The nearest member of my species is in Asia, and even if I could travel, the biological imperative makes it almost impossible to think clearly enough for complex planning. My mind is scattered right now." As if to prove her point, Zara suddenly stood up and walked to the window again, pressing both palms against the glass. Alex watched her shoulders shake with what looked like suppressed energy. "What happens if you go through this alone?" he asked gently. "Nothing good. The process is designed for 2 minds to merge temporarily, to share the intensity and find balance together. Without that, the mental and physical strain can cause permanent damage. Some people lose their ability to connect with others entirely. Others experience complete psychological breaks. The next week was like watching someone slowly unravel. Zara's skin took on an almost luminescent quality, and the air around her seemed to hum with electricity. She stopped trying to maintain normal conversations, instead speaking in fragments about home, about connections she couldn't make, about feeling like every nerve in her body was on fire. Alex did what he could. He brought her water when she forgot to drink, made sure she ate something even when she claimed she wasn't hungry, and tried to keep the apartment as comfortable as possible despite the rising temperature that seemed to radiate from her. But the worst part was watching her mental state deteriorate. Zara, who had always been sharp and articulate, began losing track of conversations mid-sentence. She'd start telling him about something from her childhood on her home world, then suddenly ask him what they'd been talking about. "I can feel my mind fracturing," she admitted during one of her clearer moments. "It's like trying to hold on to thoughts that keep slipping away. My people aren't meant to go through this alone." Alex felt helpless watching his friend suffer. He researched everything he could about isolation, stress responses, and mental health, but nothing in human medicine seemed relevant to what Zara was experiencing. On the 10th day, things reached a crisis point. Alex came home from classes to find Zara curled up in a corner of the living room, rocking back and forth and speaking rapidly in her native language. The temperature in the apartment had to be over 90 degrees, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with heat waves. When he knelt beside her and touched her shoulder, she looked up at him with eyes that barely seemed to recognize him. "I can't do this," she whispered. "It's too much. The need for connection is overwhelming, but there's no one here who can understand, no one who can share this experience with me." That's when Alex made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "What, if there was someone?" he asked quietly. Zara looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean? You said the process involves mental connection, sharing the experience with someone. What if that someone didn't have to be from your species? What if it just had to be someone who cared about you and was willing to help?" For the first time, in days, Zara's expression became completely focused. "Alex, you don't understand what you're suggesting. This isn't just emotional support. The connection runs deeper than anything humans experience. It could be dangerous for you." "More dangerous than watching you go through this alone?" Alex asked. "You're my friend, Zara. If there's something I can do to help, then I want to try." Zara stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her struggling between hope and fear. "I don't know if it would even work," she said finally. "There's no record of my people bonding with humans during this time. But the alternative is me, losing my mind completely." Alex took her hand, surprised by how warm it was. "Then let's figure it out together." Neither of them realized they were about to discover just how deep the connection between two different species could go. Alex never thought he'd end up with the weirdest roommate story in college history. It all started 6 months ago, when his previous roommate moved out, leaving him with a 2-bedroom apartment he couldn't afford alone. Being a broke computer science student, he posted an ad on every platform he could find. Most responses were either sketchy or from people who seemed like they'd never clean a dish in their lives. Then came Zara's message. Short, polite, and she offered to pay 3 months up front. When they met at a coffee shop near campus, Alex was impressed. She was quiet but friendly, well-dressed, and asked all the right questions about lease terms and house rules. "I work as a tech consultant," she explained when he asked about her job. "I travel sometimes, but mostly I work from home. I'm very clean and quiet." Alex thought he'd hit the roommate jackpot. She moved in the next week with just 3 boxes, and a strange collection of smooth river stones that she arranged carefully on her windowsill. The first month was perfect. She paid bills on time, never left messes, and somehow made their ancient Wi-Fi run faster than ever. But Zara had habits that made Alex scratch his head. She never ate during the day, claiming she preferred evening meals. He'd hear her moving around the kitchen at midnight, preparing elaborate dishes that smelled amazing but looked nothing like any cuisine he recognized. When he asked about the recipes, she'd just smile and say they were family traditions. Then, There were the stones. Every few days, Zara would disappear for hours and return with new ones, each perfectly smooth and round. She'd spend evening examining them with a magnifying glass, sorting them by size and color. When Alex jokingly asked if she was building something, she laughed it off. "They help me relax," she said. "Like meditation beads, but different." The humming started in month 2. Soft, melodic sounds that seemed to follow mathematical patterns. Alex, being good with numbers, noticed the sequences. Sometimes she'd hum what sounded like prime numbers. Other times it was Fibonacci sequences. When he mentioned it, Zara looked genuinely surprised. "I do that?" she asked. "I wasn't aware. It's probably just something I picked up from my family." Alex found himself growing protective of his mysterious roommate. When friends visited and made jokes about her quirky behavior, he'd change the subject. Zara was different, sure, but she was also the most considerate person he'd ever lived with. She helped him debug code when he was stuck, always seemed to know exactly what was wrong with his programs, and had insights into technology that amazed him. "How did you know that algorithm would work?" he asked one night after she'd helped him solve a particularly difficult assignment. "Lucky guess," she'd say, but Alex noticed she never seemed to guess wrong. The real strangeness began in month 3. Alex woke up one morning to use the bathroom and heard soft music coming from Zara's room. Not from speakers, but like someone singing a lullaby. He pressed his ear to the door and realized the sound was coming from multiple directions at once, as if the room itself was singing. He knocked gently. "Zara? Everything okay?" The music stopped immediately. "Fine, just listening to some music from back home." But when he walked past her room later, he noticed a faint blue light seeping under her door. Not the blue of a computer screen or LED lights, but something softer, warmer, like captured moonlight. Alex started paying closer attention. Zara never seemed to sleep at normal hours, but he'd hear her moving around at 3 a.m. She never got sick, never seemed tired, and had an uncanny ability to predict weather changes days in advance. When he asked her about it, she'd laugh and say she'd always been good at reading cloud patterns. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in February. Alex had overslept and rushed out of his room to grab breakfast before his early class. He pushed open the kitchen door and froze. Zara was floating, 3 feet off the ground, sitting cross-legged in the air above her meditation mat, surrounded by that same soft blue glow he'd seen under her door. Her collection of stones circled slowly around her like planets orbiting the sun. Her eyes were closed, and she looked completely peaceful. Alex stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. His brain tried to process what he was seeing. People didn't float. Physics didn't work that way. This had to be some kind of illusion, a magic trick, anything but what his eyes were telling him. Then Zara's eyes opened. She saw Alex standing in the doorway, mouth hanging open, and the blue glow disappeared instantly. She dropped to the mat with a soft thud, and all her stones clattered to the floor. They stared at each other in complete silence. "I can explain," Zara said finally, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. Alex's first instinct was to run. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this wasn't possible, that he must be dreaming or having some kind of breakdown. But looking at Zara's face, seeing the fear and vulnerability there, something else kicked in. "Okay," he said, sitting down heavily in one of their kitchen chairs. "I'm listening." What followed was the most unbelievable conversation of Alex's life. Zara made coffee with shaking hands while explaining that she wasn't from around here. "Not from another state or country, but from somewhere much, much further away. My people have been living quietly among humans for decades," she said, not meeting his eyes. "We're not invaders or anything scary from movies. We're just trying to fit in, to learn, to contribute something positive." She explained that her species had technology far beyond human understanding, but they used it carefully, helping advance human science in small ways that wouldn't cause panic or disruption. She worked as a consultant because her insights into computing and technology were valuable, but she had to be careful not to reveal too much too quickly. "The floating thing?" Alex asked weakly. "Meditation technique from home. I thought you'd left for class already. I'm usually much more careful." Alex spent the next hour asking questions that Zara answered with patient honesty. Her people lived much longer than humans. They could manipulate certain forms of energy that humans hadn't discovered yet. They needed less sleep and had different nutritional needs, which explained her midnight cooking sessions. "Are there others?" Alex asked. "A few, scattered around the world. We stay in contact, but we try to blend in. Most humans aren't ready for this kind of revelation." Alex nodded slowly. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything as an elaborate prank, but the evidence was right in front of him. The impossibly advanced, help with his coding, the perfect predictions, the strange humming patterns that followed mathematical sequences no human would naturally know. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Zara finally looked up at him, and he saw genuine friendship in her eyes. "Because you've been kind to me. Because you defended my weird habits to your friends instead of making fun of me. Because I think you can handle the truth, and honestly, keeping secrets from someone you live with is exhausting." The rest of that day passed in a blur. Alex skipped classes and they talked for hours. Zara showed him some of her technology, small devices that looked like jewelry but could do things his smartphone couldn't dream of. She demonstrated how she could sense electromagnetic fields and predict weather by feeling pressure changes humans couldn't detect. By evening, Alex realized his life had changed completely. He was living with someone from another world, and somehow that felt less scary than exciting. Zara was still the same considerate, intelligent person he'd grown to care about as a friend. She just happened to be extraordinary in ways he'd never imagined. "What happens now?" he asked as they sat on their couch, surrounded by the strange normalcy of their shared apartment. "Now we go back to being roommates," Zara said with a smile. "Just with fewer secrets between us." Neither of them knew that in just a few months, those secrets would become the least of their problems. Alex's offer to help changed everything between them, but neither understood what they were getting into. The next morning, Zara seemed more focused than she'd been in days, though the tremors in her hands and the unusual warmth radiating from her body hadn't lessened. "I need to explain what this would involve," she said, sitting across from him at their kitchen table. "My people's bonding process isn't just emotional support. It creates a temporary mental link between two minds, allowing them to share thoughts, feelings, and even sensory experiences." Alex tried to wrap his head around that concept. "Like telepathy?" "Similar, but deeper. During the bonding period, the boundaries between individual consciousness become blurred. You would experience what I experience, feel what I feel, and vice versa. It's how my species manages the intensity of this biological cycle." The idea should have terrified him, but looking at Zara's exhausted face and seeing how much she was suffering, Alex felt only determination. "What do we need to do?" Zara spent the next hour explaining the process as best she could. Her people had rituals and preparations that took place over several days, but given their situation, they'd have to adapt. The mental connection would start gradually, she explained, beginning with simple shared awareness and deepening over time. "The danger for you," she said seriously, "is that human minds aren't designed for this kind of connection. Your brain might not be able to process the intensity of what you'll experience through our link. And the danger for you if we don't try?" Zara's silence was answer enough. They started that evening. Zara dimmed the lights and had Alex sit facing her on the living room floor. She placed her hands over his, and immediately he felt a strange, tingling sensation. "Just breathe and try to keep your mind open," she instructed. "Don't fight whatever you start to feel." At first, Nothing happened beyond the tingling in his hands. Then, gradually, Alex became aware of something else in his thoughts. Not his own voice, but something warmer, more melodic. It felt like having a song stuck in his head, except the song was made of emotions rather than words. "Can you sense that?" Zara asked, though her lips didn't move. Alex jerked back in surprise, breaking the connection. "Did you just talk without speaking?" Zara smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. "The link is starting to form. Your mind is more adaptable than I expected." Over the next few days, they practiced the connection in short sessions. Alex learned to recognize Zara's mental voice and began to sense her emotions as clearly as his own. When she felt anxious, his chest would tighten with worry that wasn't his. When she experienced moments of relief, he'd suddenly feel lighter without knowing why. The physical changes in their apartment became more pronounced. The temperature stayed constantly warm, and sometimes Alex could swear he saw colors that shouldn't exist, like the blue glow he'd first witnessed during Zara's meditation, but more vibrant and complex. "You're starting to perceive the world more like my people do," Zara explained during one of their sessions. "We can sense electromagnetic fields, feel vibrations that humans normally can't detect, and see slightly beyond your visual spectrum." Alex found himself becoming aware of things he'd never noticed before. He could feel the hum of electricity in the walls, sense the vibration of footsteps from neighbors 3 floors away, and sometimes catch glimpses of that impossible blue light even when Zara wasn't actively using her abilities. But the real breakthrough came on the 5th day, when Alex accidentally tapped into one of Zara's memories. They were sitting together in their usual practice position when suddenly Alex was no longer in their apartment. Instead, he stood in a vast landscape under 3 suns, watching beings that looked like Zara move gracefully through what appeared to be a living city, where buildings grew like trees and paths shifted to accommodate travelers. The memory lasted only seconds, but it left Alex breathless with wonder and longing for a place he'd never been. "I'm sorry," Zara said, looking concerned. "That shouldn't have happened so soon. Are you okay?" "That was your home?" Alex asked, still reeling from the experience. Zara nodded, and through their connection, he felt her homesickness like a physical ache in his chest. "I haven't been back in 15 years. I chose to stay on Earth, to study your people and contribute what I could, but during times like this, the distance feels unbearable." Alex reached out and took her hands, and the connection between them strengthened. Through the link, he tried to send her comfort, warmth, the feeling of being cared for and understood. To his surprise, it worked. He felt Zara's tension ease and saw tears of relief in her eyes. "How are you doing this?" she whispered. "Humans aren't supposed to be able to project emotions through a mental link." Alex didn't know how to answer. All he knew was that seeing Zara in pain made him want to help, and somehow their connection allowed him to do that in ways he'd never imagined possible. Their practice sessions grew longer and deeper. Alex began to understand the mathematical patterns in Zara's humming, recognizing them as expressions of emotional states rather than just random sequences. He learned to sense her needs before she expressed them, bringing her water when she was thirsty or adjusting the room temperature when she felt uncomfortable. But the connection wasn't one-sided. Through their link, Zara experienced human emotions, with an intensity her species rarely felt. She laughed at his memories of childhood summers, felt the warmth of his family relationships, and experienced his genuine affection for her in a way that seemed to surprise and comfort her. "Your people feel things so directly, so purely," she told him during one session. "My species tends to intellectualize emotions, but through you, I'm experiencing them as raw sensations. It's overwhelming, but also beautiful." As the connection deepened, the boundaries between their individual experiences became increasingly blurred. Alex would wake up humming melodies he'd never heard, while Zara found herself craving foods she'd never tried. They began finishing each other's sentences, not because they'd grown closer as friends, but because they were literally sharing thoughts. The apartment became their cocoon, a space where the normal rules of individual identity no longer seemed to apply. They moved around each other with perfect coordination, communicated as much through the mental link as through speech, and shared experiences that neither could fully explain to anyone else. But Alex was beginning to realize that while the connection was helping Zara through her biological crisis, it was changing him in ways he couldn't fully understand. He was becoming something more than human, but possibly less than himself. By the third week, Alex was losing pieces of himself in ways that terrified him. He'd wake up speaking words in Zara's language, craving foods that didn't exist on Earth, and feeling homesick for places he'd never been. The connection that had started as a way to help his friend was consuming his identity bit by bit. The worst part was that he couldn't tell where his thoughts ended and Zara's began anymore. During their sessions, which now lasted most of the day, Alex would find himself thinking about complex mathematical theorems he'd never studied, understanding technology that was centuries beyond human development, and feeling emotions that belonged to someone else entirely. "I dreamed about the three sons again last night," Alex told Zara one morning, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "But this time I wasn't just seeing your memories. I was remembering my own childhood there, playing with friends whose names I somehow know." Zara looked at him with growing concern. "Alex, those aren't your memories. The connection is bleeding. My experiences into your mind, creating false recollections. This is exactly what I was afraid of." But even as she spoke, Alex could feel her thoughts mixing with his. He knew she was worried about him, but he also felt her biological desperation, the overwhelming need for connection that drove her species during this time. She was trapped between wanting to protect him and being unable to stop the process her body demanded. Their apartment had become completely cut off from the outside world. Alex had stopped attending classes without really deciding to, and he hadn't answered his phone in days. The space around them hummed with energy that made electronics behave strangely. Their microwave displayed times that didn't exist, their television picked up signals from stations that weren't broadcasting, and their computers showed error messages in languages Alex was starting to understand despite never learning them. "We need to slow this down," Zara said during one of her clearer moments. "You're losing too much of yourself. I can feel your human thoughts getting fainter each day." But when she tried to pull back from the connection, the physical pain that shot through her body was so intense that Alex felt it too, doubling over from agony that wasn't his own. The biological imperative driving her species wasn't designed to be stopped halfway through, and attempting to sever their bond was like trying to hold back a river with their bare hands. "I can't," Zara gasped, tears streaming down her face. "My body won't let me disconnect. The process has to complete or it could cause permanent damage to both of us." Alex wanted to comfort her, but his ability to form coherent thoughts was slipping away. Sometimes he'd start to speak in English and finish sentences in her native tongue. Other times, he'd try to remember his own childhood and instead recall her early years on a world with crystal mountains and cities that sang in harmony with the wind. The crisis came when Alex's sister Lauren decided to visit unannounced. Alex had always been close to his sister, calling her regularly and meeting for lunch whenever she was in town. When he'd gone silent for over a week, she'd driven across the state to check on him, worried that something terrible had happened. She knocked on the apartment door for 10 minutes before using the spare key Alex had given her years ago. What she found inside defied every assumption she had about reality. The apartment was stifling hot despite the winter weather outside. Strange symbols were drawn on every wall in what looked like chalk but glowed with faint light. Furniture had been moved to create open spaces, and smooth stones were arranged in complex patterns across the floor. But the most shocking sight was Alex and Zara themselves. They sat in the center of the living room, hands touching, surrounded. By that impossible blue glow Lauren had heard Alex mention in stories she'd assumed were jokes. Both of them looked like they hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. Alex's eyes were open, but when Lauren called his name, he didn't respond. He was staring at Zara with an intensity that scared her, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow and distant. "The resonance frequency needs to be adjusted," he said in a tone that didn't sound like him at all. "The harmonic convergence is approaching optimal parameters." "Alex?" Lauren shook his shoulder, but he barely seemed to notice her presence. "What's happening here? What's wrong with you?" Zara turned to look at Lauren, and for a moment her expression cleared. "You need to leave," she said urgently. "This isn't safe for you to witness." But Lauren was Alex's older sister, and she'd spent years protecting him from everything from playground bullies to bad breakups. She wasn't about to walk away when he clearly needed help. "I'm calling an ambulance," she announced, pulling out her phone. "No!" both Alex and Zara said simultaneously, their voices perfectly synchronized in a way that made Lauren's skin crawl. The next few hours were a nightmare of confusion and arguments. Lauren tried to understand what was happening while Zara attempted to explain, without revealing too much about her true nature. Alex, meanwhile, seemed to drift in and out of awareness, sometimes recognizing his sister, and other times staring through her like she wasn't there. Finally, Lauren made the decision. For all of them, she called their parents and then 911, reporting that her brother appeared to be having some kind of psychological breakdown and needed immediate medical attention. When the paramedics arrived, they found Alex severely dehydrated and exhausted, with vital signs that suggested extreme stress. He was conscious but disoriented, speaking in fragments about mathematical concepts none of them understood, and asking for water that tasted like home rain, whatever that meant. The separation from Zara was traumatic for both of them. As the paramedics loaded Alex into the ambulance, he reached toward the apartment with desperate urgency, speaking rapidly in a language Lauren had never heard before. Through the window, she could see Zara pressed against the glass, her face twisted with what looked like physical pain. At the hospital, doctors ran every test they could think of, but found nothing medically wrong with Alex beyond dehydration and exhaustion. His brain scans were normal, his blood work showed no signs of drugs or toxins, and physically he appeared healthy, but mentally he seemed lost, asking for someone named Zara and talking about places that didn't exist. "Has your brother been using any substances?" the doctor asked Lauren. "The symptoms suggest some kind of hallucinogenic experience, but we can't find any evidence of drug use." Lauren didn't know how to answer. She'd seen things in that apartment that her rational mind insisted couldn't be real, but the evidence was right in front of her. Something had happened to Alex, something that went beyond anything medicine could explain. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Zara was facing her own crisis. Cut off from Alex in the middle of her species' most vulnerable time, she was experiencing withdrawal symptoms that threatened to tear her mind apart. The connection they'd built over weeks had become as essential to her as breathing, and its sudden absence left her feeling like half of her consciousness had been ripped away. She had to find a way to complete the bonding process safely before both she and Alex suffered permanent damage from their forced separation. Alex spent 3 days in the hospital, and they were the most confusing days of his life. The doctors kept asking questions he couldn't answer properly because half his thoughts were still in a language that didn't have English translations. He'd try to explain that he felt fine, just different, but every time he attempted to describe what had happened with Zara, the words came out wrong. "I can still feel her," he told the psychiatrist they'd assigned to his case. "Not physically, but like there's an echo in my head where our connection used to be." Dr. Wilson wrote notes on his clipboard and asked gentle questions about stress, drug use, and Alex's mental health history. Alex answered honestly, but he could see the skepticism in the doctor's eyes. How could he explain that he'd shared consciousness with someone from another world? Meanwhile, his family was going through their own crisis. Lauren had told their parents about finding Alex in that overheated apartment, talking nonsense and seeming completely disconnected from reality. She'd mentioned his strange roommate but hadn't known how to describe what she'd witnessed without, sounding crazy herself. Maybe he's been working too hard, their mother suggested when she visited on the second day. You know how he gets obsessed with his computer projects. But Alex's father was more direct. Son, Lauren says you've been living with some woman who's been acting bizarre. Did she give you something? Some kind of experimental drug? Alex wanted to laugh at how far from the truth they were, but he also felt a deep sadness. These were the people who knew him best, who'd raised him and supported him through everything, and he couldn't share the most incredible experience of his life with them. They'd never believed that he'd connected minds with someone from another world, that he'd experienced memories of planets with 3 suns and cities that grew like living things. The withdrawal from Zara was affecting him in ways the doctors couldn't understand. Alex felt like part of his mind had been amputated. He'd grown used to sensing her thoughts and emotions, to having someone else's perspective constantly available to balance his own. Without that connection, the world felt flat and empty, like trying to see with one eye closed. But gradually, as the days passed, Alex began to remember who he was before the bonding. His own memories became clearer, his thoughts more organized. He started to understand just how much of himself he'd lost in those final weeks of connection. The experience had been incredible, but it had also nearly erased his individual identity entirely. On the 4th day, Zara came to visit. She looked terrible. Her skin had lost its usual healthy glow, her hands shook with exhaustion, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept since their separation. But she also looked more like herself than she had in weeks. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sitting carefully in the chair beside his hospital bed. "Like I'm learning to be human again," Alex said honestly. "It's weird, remembering what my own thoughts sound like without yours mixed in." Zara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The bonding period ended 2 days ago. My people's biological cycle completed, even though we were separated. I think the connection we'd already established was enough to carry me through the worst of it. And you're okay?" "I'm different than I was before, but not damaged. The incomplete bonding left me with some of your perspectives and emotions that I didn't have before. I understand humans better now, feel things more directly. It's not unpleasant, just new." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing how much their relationship had changed. They weren't just roommates anymore, weren't even just friends. They'd shared something that neither of them fully understood, something that had left them permanently connected in subtle ways. "The doctors want to keep me for another day or 2, Alex said. "They can't figure out what happened to me medically speaking." "I've been in contact with others of my kind," Zara replied. "What we experienced isn't completely unknown. There are records of emergency bondings between different species, though usually the non-native partner doesn't survive the process with their sanity intact." Alex felt a chill. "I could have lost my mind permanently?" "Yes, but you didn't. Your mental resilience is remarkable even by my people's standards. The connection left you changed but not broken." When Alex was finally discharged, he returned to an apartment that felt both familiar and strange. Zara had cleaned away the symbols on the walls and returned the furniture to normal positions, but the space still hummed with residual energy from their bonding experience. "We need to talk about what happens next," Zara said as they sat on their couch, maintaining a careful physical distance. "We can't go back to being ordinary roommates after what we've shared." Alex knew she was right. Even now, he could sense her emotions more clearly than those of any other person. When she was worried, he felt an echo of that concern. When she was happy, warmth spread through his chest. The connection was much weaker than it had been during the bonding, but it was permanent. I've been offered a position with my people's council, Zara continued. They want me to help develop protocols for situations like ours, cases where members of my species need emergency assistance while living among humans. That sounds important, Alex said, though he felt a pang of loss at the thought of her leaving. It is, and they want you to help. Alex looked at her in surprise. Me? But I'm human. You're human, who successfully bonded with one of my people and retained your sanity. That makes you incredibly valuable for understanding how these connections affect both species. They're offering you a chance to study consciousness and interspecies communication in ways no human has ever had access to before. Over the following weeks, Alex made the most difficult decision of his life. He withdrew from his regular college courses and began studying with Zara's people, learning about consciousness, connection, and the science behind what they'd experienced together. His family thought he'd joined some kind of research program and was proud of his opportunity to work with advanced technology consultants. They never learned the full truth about Zara's nature or what had really happened during those intense weeks in February. Alex and Zara remained close friends, but they learned to maintain healthy boundaries. The permanent connection between them was manageable as long as they respected each other's individual identity and didn't try to recreate the intensity of their bonding experience. Years later, Alex would become one of the leading experts on human-alien consciousness interaction, though he published his research in terms that his colleagues interpreted as theoretical computer science and psychology. Zara continued her work bridging the gap between species, helping other displaced members of her people navigate life on Earth. Their experience had taught them both valuable lessons about connection, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between helping someone you care about and losing yourself in the process. They'd discovered that love and friendship could transcend species boundaries, but also that every relationship required careful attention to individual identity and mutual respect. The apartment they'd shared became a symbol of possibility, proof. That understanding between different forms of consciousness was not only possible but transformative for everyone involved. Their story became legend among both species, an example of what could be achieved when beings chose connection over fear, even when the consequences were unknown and potentially dangerous.